My husband's mom invited his ex to our baby shower, so I exposed her affair. I never wanted to believe that sentence would belong to my life. I'm Jennifer Aniston, 38 years old, a residential interior designer based in Asheville, North Carolina. My work is my rhythm. I restore spaces that hold memories, some broken, some barely hanging on, and I turn them into rooms people feel safe in again. Ironically, I never saw the cracks forming in my own life until I was already living in a house that no longer felt like mine. I met Ethan at a lighting design conference in Savannah. He wasn't flashy or overly confident, but he remembered the way I liked my tea and let me talk through concepts without interrupting. That's what caught me off guard. I wasn't looking for a husband. I was just learning how to breathe again after a messy client betrayal and a broken lease with my former business partner. But Ethan made space feel calm, like I didn't have to work so hard to be understood. We dated for a year before we got married, in a quiet outdoor ceremony near the Blue Ridge Parkway. His mother, Lorraine, gave a toast that night. She held my hand a second too long and said, "I can see why he chose you. You remind me of me when I was younger." I laughed politely at the time. I didn't understand what she meant, but I would. Ethan came from a family with deep local roots. His father, Tom, was a retired city planner, and Lorraine had once run a high-end event planning firm. Now mostly retired, but still active on boards and in social circles. I was raised in a quiet working-class home in the Midwest. My dad was a postal worker. My mom did nails from our kitchen table. I paid my way through design school with freelance work and off-season Airbnb cleaning. I wasn't ashamed of that, but I quickly learned that Lorraine wasn't interested in origin stories that didn't sparkle. In the beginning, I tried. I went to their family brunches, sat through golf tournaments I didn't understand, smiled through casual comments about how city girls like me probably didn't grow up around formal dining. Lorraine liked to make everything look like inclusion, but it always came with a test. One day it was calling me by Ethan's ex's name by accident. Another time it was offering to fix the layout of my studio's portfolio because it lacked cohesion. She never said I didn't belong. She just hinted that I should feel lucky I was allowed in. When Ethan and I found out we were expecting, I cried in the stairwell of our home, one hand gripping the railing, the other holding the test. It wasn't sadness or joy. It was something else. Fear, maybe. Relief that my body worked. Dread that Lorraine would want in. I told Ethan that night, and he pulled me into his arms. "Let's keep it between us for now," I said. "Let's just have something be ours." For a while, it worked. Lorraine seemed unusually restrained. She sent hand-knit baby booties and asked if I needed help sourcing eco-friendly fabrics for the nursery. I thought maybe we'd turned a page. She even offered to host the baby shower, citing family tradition. Ethan encouraged me to let her. "It'll mean a lot to her," he said. "You don't have to lift a finger." I should have known better than to stay hands-off with someone who treats control like oxygen. I gave her a guest list, carefully thought out with friends from college, my studio team, and a few neighbors who had supported us early on. She said, of course, she'd make sure everyone received proper invitations. 2 weeks before the shower, my best friend Grace called. I just got a weird message from Lorraine. She said, "She asked about your high school boyfriend. Why would she bring that up?" I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Maybe she's just trying to make conversation," I replied. But the knot in my stomach told me it wasn't casual. Grace didn't buy it either. She also asked if you were emotionally stable. She said carefully, "Jen, I don't think she's just planning a party." I told Ethan, hoping he'd talk to his mom. Instead, he said, "She probably didn't mean anything by it. You know how she gets." And that was the moment I realized something I hadn't let myself say out loud before. He didn't see it, not fully. Maybe he couldn't. I decided to drop off a few small favors I'd designed for the shower myself. Lorraine hadn't answered my texts in 2 days. So I used the spare key Ethan had given her for emergencies. Her car wasn't in the driveway. The house was quiet. On the kitchen island sat a handwritten guest list, meticulously outlined, floral stationery and all. I didn't even have to scan it. One name was written in larger letters than the rest, underlined and circled twice. Alyssa Kane. I took a photo with my phone and walked out of that house without making a sound. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just knew one thing for certain. If Lorraine wanted a spectacle, she'd get one. But it wouldn't be the one she planned. I didn't mention Alyssa's name to Ethan right away. I knew how that conversation would go. He would frown, ask me if I was sure, then spin some half-hearted explanation about group invites or accidental carryovers. I'd heard every variation of denial in the past 2 years. So instead, I sent the guest list photo to my work email, saved it twice, then placed a printed copy in my sketchbook and another in my wallet. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was preparing for one. The days leading up to the baby shower felt like walking through a set built for someone else's life. Lorraine was suddenly texting me hourly, asking for last-minute baby trivia facts and updates on my outfit, reminding me that photographers would be attending and that a maternity makeup artist would arrive at 8 a.m. sharp. When I told her I preferred something simple, she responded with, "It's not just about you. Jennifer, this baby is part of our legacy." I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. Noted. I typed. Nothing more. Grace stopped by the night before the shower. She brought Thai food, ginger tea, and that particular look she always gave me when she knew I was biting down feelings too tightly. We sat on my living room floor, me in sweatpants and compression socks, her in old jeans and a hoodie that said emotional support friend. "You sure you're okay with going?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I'm going anyway." We didn't talk about what would happen, but as she was leaving, she looked at me with something that felt like both a warning and a promise. "If anything feels off tomorrow," she said, "just give me a look. I'll handle the rest." The morning of the shower arrived with overcast skies and a sharp chill that didn't belong in late spring. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down the pale pink dress Lorraine had insisted I wear. It fit wrong at the shoulders and bunched at the waist, but I no longer had the energy to push back. Ethan drove me to his parents' house and kissed me on the cheek before running a few errands Lorraine had strategically assigned him. "You'll be fine," he said. "Just smile and breathe." Inside, the house was transformed. White tents covered the backyard. Balloon arches lined the entrance. A giant banner read, "Welcome, Baby Belle." Though Ethan and I had never confirmed the name, I stood still for a moment, trying to anchor myself. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt wrong. Lorraine appeared from the dining room, arms spread wide, voice dripping with forced affection. "Darling, you made it. The camera crew will be here in 20, so let's freshen up that hair." She handed me a compact I didn't ask for, then ushered me toward a chair that felt like a spotlight. Her friends began to arrive in clusters. Women I barely knew calling me sweetheart while glancing at my stomach like I was a prop in a play they didn't audition for. I looked for Grace and felt immediate relief when I spotted her at the far end of the garden, dressed like she had better places to be. She gave me a nod, discreet but clear. She was ready. Then the moment came. The doorbell rang, and Lorraine nearly tripped over herself to answer it. I didn't have to guess who it was. I already knew. Alyssa stepped inside wearing a navy blue dress that hugged every curve I no longer recognized in myself. She carried a gift wrapped in metallic silver with a perfect bow. Her hair was curled to perfection, her smile wide and self-assured. Lorraine called out like announcing a celebrity guest. "Everyone, this is Alyssa. You all remember how close she and Ethan were." I watched the room shift. A few of Lorraine's friends looked confused. Others smiled too widely. I felt Grace tense behind me. Alyssa walked over like she owned the house, placed her gift on the table next to mine, and turned to me with a chirpy, "Hi, Jennifer. You look tired." It wasn't even subtle. I let out a slow breath through my nose and smiled. "Third trimester," I said, "comes with the territory." Ethan returned 20 minutes later, visibly surprised to see Alyssa, but not surprised enough. He greeted her politely, awkwardly, then glanced at me, almost as if asking for a cue. I gave him nothing, let him sit with the silence. As the lunch was being served, I noticed Lorraine had rearranged the seating, Alyssa beside Ethan, me across the table, far enough that I'd have to raise my voice to join a conversation. Grace leaned in and whispered, "You good?" I nodded once. "Not yet," I thought. But soon. Lorraine stood with a glass in hand and clinked it twice, calling for attention. "Before we serve dessert, I just want to say how grateful I am for the love surrounding this child. And to celebrate, I've made Ethan's favorite cake using Alyssa's family recipe because tradition matters." The room shifted again. A few murmurs, a few glances in my direction. My stomach twisted, but not from the pregnancy. I looked at Grace, gave her the look, and stood up slowly. I hadn't planned to speak before dessert, but I'd just been given the perfect transition. I tapped the edge of my glass twice and waited for the room to quiet. People turned slowly, not sure what to expect, their faces frozen between politeness and discomfort. I felt my fingers trembling slightly against the stem of the glass, but my voice came out calm. "Before dessert is served," I began, "I'd like to say a few words too, not just as a mother-to-be, but as someone who's had a front-row seat to what this day has become." The air shifted. Lorraine lowered her glass but didn't sit. Alyssa turned slightly toward Ethan, as if waiting for him to do something. He didn't. Grace stood behind the row of guests with her phone angled just slightly forward. I could see the red recording light. I took another breath and set the glass down gently. "When I first found out I was pregnant, I didn't tell anyone for 2 weeks," I said, scanning the crowd, not because I wasn't excited, but because I knew that the moment I shared the news, the story wouldn't belong entirely to me anymore. A few women nodded, the older ones with knowing expressions, but I didn't expect that the moment I became a mother, I'd also have to fight so hard to protect what motherhood means to me. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small flash drive, holding it up just long enough for Ethan to see. "Would you mind helping me connect this to your mother's TV?" I asked. And he blinked like he'd just woken from a nap. Yeah, sure." He crossed the room slowly, confused, glancing between me and Lorraine. I saw Lorraine's shoulders tighten as she turned toward me. "Jennifer, I really don't think this is," but I cut her off with nothing more than a glance. The first image that appeared on the screen was a screenshot of Lorraine's guest list. Alyssa's name circled in bold red ink. This was taken 4 days ago at Lorraine's kitchen table. I said, I wasn't invited to help plan this party, but I did show up to drop off favors, and I saw this. I took this. Gasps rippled through the room. I didn't pause. The next image was a string of text messages, taken from Lorraine's phone when she left it unattended on the counter. I hadn't planned to snoop. But the message preview flashing from a contact named Alyssa C. was enough to make me pause. One swipe later, the whole thread unfolded. Blue dress, just like the one from Jackson's wedding. He loved you in that. Sit next to him. Remind him what he's missing. Jen's pregnancy hormones will handle the rest. I heard a fork clatter to the floor. Someone stifled a laugh. Lorraine stepped forward, hands raised, voice quivering. This is a complete invasion of privacy. Jennifer, that phone wasn't yours to look at. I met her eyes without blinking. You're right, it wasn't. But the moment you used this party to stage a personal reunion at my expense, you stopped playing by the rules you expect everyone else to follow. I clicked forward, a new message thread, this time, not with Alyssa, but a contact saved as M. The texts weren't subtle, romantic emojis, weekend getaway confirmations, a photo of Lorraine in a robe, glass of wine in hand, taken inside a resort that definitely wasn't where she told Tom she'd be that weekend. This one is your golf instructor. Isn't it? I asked quietly, directing the question not to Lorraine, but to Tom. His face had gone pale, eyes fixed on the screen. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. More murmurs now. Some guests stood awkwardly, unsure whether to stay or run. Alyssa had gone completely still, lips pressed tightly together, no longer smiling. I turned to Ethan. You told me you didn't know she was coming, I said, that your mom probably just hadn't updated the list, that maybe I was being too sensitive. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His silence wasn't new. What was new was that I no longer feared it. I turned back to the guests. This wasn't supposed to be a spectacle. I didn't want this day to be about revenge. I just wanted to become a mother without being manipulated, without being humiliated, without being tested for loyalty I never lacked. My voice cracked, but only slightly. I steadied it before continuing. I want to raise a daughter who doesn't have to shrink herself to fit into someone else's comfort zone. And that starts with showing her what it looks like to stand up and say enough. I clicked off the screen. Silence returned, heavier than before. Lorraine stood in the center of it all, still clutching her wine glass as if it might anchor her. Tom turned and walked toward the back door without a word. Alyssa followed shortly after, not even bothering to collect her gift. Grace stepped beside me, looping her arm through mine. Let's go, she whispered. We've said enough. As I walked out of Lorraine's house, belly heavy, heart clear, I heard nothing but the echo of my own steps. And for the first time in years, I didn't look back. I stayed with Grace that night. Her guest bedroom was small, but the quiet was wide and steady, like a pause I hadn't realized I needed. I didn't say much. She didn't push. She brought me peppermint tea, propped up my swollen feet, and played soft jazz through her old Bluetooth speaker while folding laundry beside me like we were roommates again. Every few minutes, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't look. The first few messages came from Ethan, short and frantic, then from Tom, then silence. Lorraine never texted, not that I expected her to. The next morning, I woke to a slice of sourdough toast and a single line from Grace. It's all over town. She handed me her phone. A guest from the party had posted a blurry clip on social media. The sound slightly distorted, but the images unmistakable. My voice steady. Lorraine lunging for my phone. The text messages lit up on the TV. The comment section was a war zone. Some praised the iconic takedown. Others questioned whether it was too public, too dramatic, too much. I scrolled for a moment, then stopped. It didn't matter what strangers thought. I hadn't done it for them. Later that afternoon, Ethan showed up at Grace's door. He looked like he hadn't slept, shirt wrinkled, jaw unshaven, holding a small grocery bag like a peace offering. Grace answered first. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me. I nodded slightly. She stepped aside. He walked in, not like a man with answers, but like someone trying to find solid ground again. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I led him out to the back porch. The air was warm, but not suffocating. We sat in the mismatched chairs Grace kept by her herb pots. For a few minutes, we listened to the cicadas fill the silence for us. "I didn't know," he said first, "about the text, the plan, Alyssa." I believed him, but belief wasn't the same as trust. "You didn't want to know." I replied, "That's different." He exhaled like the weight in his chest had finally been named. "You're right," he said. "I didn't want to see it. I grew up watching my mom manipulate every room she walked into. I got good at pretending it wasn't happening." He rubbed his hands together. "She used to treat my dad like a background character. He'd just take it. I guess I thought that's what you do. You keep the peace. You keep going." I looked at him, his face tired, his voice honest. "You didn't keep peace," I said. "You kept silence, and that's what hurt the most." He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, like he'd finally heard it the way I meant it. "I want to do better," he said. "I want to be different than him." There was a time when I would have clung to that promise like oxygen. But that day, I didn't leap toward hope. I asked him the only thing that mattered. "Are you ready to draw a boundary with your mother?" He didn't answer immediately, but after a long pause, he said the words I had waited 3 years to hear. "Yes." Over the next few days, Ethan moved into a guest room at our house, not because I wanted distance, but because we needed space to rebuild something we'd both neglected. We found a couples therapist who specialized in family enmeshment and started sessions the following week. They weren't easy. In fact, the first session ended with both of us sitting in our car afterward, in silence, staring at the dashboard like it might fix us. But it was a start, and we showed up again. Lorraine tried to spin the story. She called Ethan's relatives, crying, telling them I had ambushed her in front of guests, accusing her of betrayal without cause. But people had seen the screenshots. Some had seen it live. And for the first time, no one jumped to defend her. Tom moved into a hotel the day after the shower, when Ethan visited him 2 weeks later. He said it was the first time his father had looked him in the eye and said, "I'm sorry I let her do this to you too." One afternoon, about a month after the shower, Lorraine showed up at our house unannounced. Ethan answered. I watched from the hallway. She stood there in pearls and pastels, the picture of a woman who still believed image could fix what truth had broken. "I came to apologize," she said, eyes not quite meeting his, if Jennifer felt embarrassed. "I'm sorry she misunderstood my intentions." Ethan didn't even flinch. "That's not an apology." He said quietly, "You tried to ruin the most important moment of our life together. You've been undermining her since the beginning, until you can own that. We're done, for real this time." She left without another word, and for the first time since I married Ethan, I felt like I wasn't standing alone in my own house. In the weeks that followed, things didn't magically get easier, but they became quieter in a way that felt like healing. Ethan continued sleeping in the guest room, not out of punishment, but as a sign that he respected the space I needed to decide whether our future still had room for both of us. We went to therapy twice a week, both together and separately. Our therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Darlene, didn't ask us to relive the baby shower or dissect Lorraine's cruelty. She asked different questions. What did safety mean to me? What did silence mean to Ethan? What did we want our daughter to learn about love by watching us? Sometimes I couldn't answer. Sometimes Ethan surprised me, but what struck me most was how often our pain came from the things we hadn't said, the boundaries we never drew, the small humiliations we both absorbed because we thought it was easier than causing conflict. But conflict had come anyway, and now we had to decide if we would build something better from the wreckage, or just stand quietly in the rubble and call it stability. One afternoon, after a particularly tense session, we sat in the car together without turning on the engine. The air was thick with something unspoken. Ethan broke the silence first. "I used to think your strength was hard to love," he said, "like it made you unreachable. But now I realize I just didn't know how to stand beside it. I didn't answer right away. I let the words settle before responding. I never needed you to be louder than me. I just needed you to stop holding the microphone for someone who kept talking over me." He nodded, eyes wet. "I hear you now," he said, and for once, I believed him. We began preparing the nursery slowly. We picked a color together, something soft and deep, not pink, not blue, just real. We donated half the items Lorraine had sent over. Ethan returned the heirloom crib she insisted we use, the one that had belonged to him and, according to her, had generations of Crane babies' dreams in its wood. We bought a new one together, something simple, something ours. Meanwhile, Lorraine's world began to shrink. Tom filed for separation. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just quietly devastating. He told Ethan that he had spent 30 years pretending that dignity was the same thing as endurance, and that now he wanted to find out who he was without her shadow standing in front of him. Ethan helped him move into a small rental near the river. For the first time in decades, his father cooked for himself, played chess in the park, and called just to ask how the nursery was going. I saw in him the kind of softness Ethan never had a chance to learn from. Until now. Lorraine's calls stopped. So did the forwarded articles, the unsolicited parenting books, the drop-ins with organic soup I never asked for. She disappeared from the weekly brunches. I assumed she was licking her wounds or spinning a new version of the story to her country club friends, one where she was the misunderstood matriarch, cast aside by an ungrateful daughter-in-law. But I didn't care. I no longer needed to prove anything to her or defend myself to people who chose to believe curated charm over lived experience. Then came the night my water broke. It was 2 a.m. Ethan had just drifted off in the guest room when I felt the warm flood and the sharp cramp that followed. I called out his name, not panicked, just certain. He was at my side in seconds. The hospital was 30 minutes away. The roads were empty. The moon followed us like a steady witness. Labor was long, 20 hours of steady breathing, surges of pain, and moments where I thought my body might split in two. Ethan held my hand through every contraction, wiped sweat from my face, read to me from the worn-out journal I'd used during the pregnancy. He read entries I didn't remember writing, one where I'd written, "I'm scared to bring her into a house that feels divided," followed by, "but maybe she'll help us find the courage to fix it." At 8:17 p.m., our daughter arrived, a red-faced, furious miracle who screamed like she knew the world was flawed and she was ready to make it better. We named her Eliza, not a legacy name, not a compromise, just ours. When the nurse placed her on my chest, I didn't cry. I breathed. For the first time in a year, I wasn't waiting for the next blow, the next insult, the next apology that never came. I was here, present, whole, and no one else's definition of family mattered more than the one I was holding in my arms. The first few days after Eliza was born felt like stepping into a different world, one that moved slower, quieter, more deliberately. Everything was new, but also stripped down to what mattered. Feed her, hold her, breathe, sleep when you can, and repeat. I had imagined the hospital discharge as a grand milestone, but when the nurse wheeled me to the curb and placed Eliza in my arms, the moment felt intimate and simple. No photographers, no floral archways, no curated memories, just me, Ethan, and the tiny human who had made everything else feel less urgent. Back at home, we kept the lights low and the voices softer. Ethan took parental leave and stayed with us, not just in body, but in attention. He handled the night feeds whenever possible, changed diapers with surprising patience, and walked Eliza around the living room each morning while I slept another hour. It wasn't performative. It wasn't a redemption arc. It was a man trying, finally, to be present. I saw it. I respected it. But I didn't rush to name it forgiveness. Some things needed time, not just good intentions. Lorraine didn't visit. She didn't call. But she did send a handwritten card on the 5th day. It arrived with no return address, her signature neat and practiced. "Congratulations on the arrival of your beautiful daughter." It read, "She will no doubt be as strong-willed as her mother. I hope one day you'll allow her to know her grandmother." I read it twice, then tucked it in the back of Eliza's baby book, not out of sentimentality, but out of record. One day, I wanted our daughter to see the full picture, not just the curated one. We set new boundaries without drama, no visitors without notice, no opinions unless requested, no comparisons to anyone else's motherhood. The rules weren't for Lorraine. Specifically, they were for everyone. But we both knew who would struggle with them most. Tom visited often, bringing meals and stories instead of advice. He held Eliza like he'd waited his entire life for that moment. One afternoon, he watched her sleep in my arms and said something I'll never forget. I thought silence kept the peace. He said, "Turns out, silence just keeps the cycle going." It landed like a quiet truth, one I had lived through but never named out loud. As the weeks passed, Ethan and I learned how to move through hard conversations without breaking them in the middle. Therapy helped, but so did time. One night, as we stood in the kitchen washing bottles, Ethan looked at me and said, "You know what scares me?" I waited. "That one day she'll ask why her grandma's not around, and I won't know how to explain it without lying or making you the villain." I rinsed the last bottle, set it down, and looked at him. Then we tell her the truth, but we tell it gently, and we tell it together. We didn't erase Lorraine from our lives. We just removed her from the center. That was the real shift. For so long, our decisions had revolved around what would keep her calm, what would avoid her judgment, what would preserve the illusion of harmony. Now, the axis had changed. Everything spun around Eliza, and by extension, around what allowed our home to be calm, safe, and honest. Grace visited often, bringing humor and sleep-safe baby lotion and the kind of support that didn't ask for credit. One evening, as we sat on the back porch while Eliza napped, she looked at me and said, "You seem different, not just exhausted, clearer." I smiled, the kind of smile that comes after grief, not in spite of it. I think I finally stopped waiting for people to give me permission to be okay. One afternoon in early spring, I stood in the nursery, holding Eliza against my shoulder, swaying gently as sunlight filtered through the curtains. The house was quiet. Ethan was in the backyard, pruning the rosemary bush, that had somehow survived winter. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I couldn't name at first. Not relief, not triumph, just peace. Not because everything was perfect, not because everyone had apologized, but because I had chosen to make space where resentment used to live, and it was finally paying off. It was almost 3 months after Eliza was born when Lorraine asked to meet. Not through Ethan, not through a card. She sent an email, short, direct, no pleasantries. I've been attending sessions. I'd like to speak to you both if you're open. I read it twice before showing it to Ethan. He didn't say anything at first, just let out a breath like he'd been waiting for this day longer than he admitted. We don't owe her anything, I said. But I don't want to raise a daughter who's afraid of hard conversations either. He nodded. Then we hear her out, together. We met at a small local cafe on a quiet Monday afternoon. Lorraine was already seated when we arrived, her posture straighter than usual, her makeup minimal, her pearl earrings noticeably absent. She looked tired, but in a way that made her human again, not untouchable. She stood when she saw us, then seemed unsure whether to offer a hug. I gave her a nod instead. That was enough. I appreciate you coming, she began, voice lower, slower. I've been in therapy since March. That was one of the conditions Tom set during the divorce proceedings. Ethan shifted slightly beside me, but said nothing. At first, I went just to check the box, but the truth is, hearing myself explain what happened at that baby shower, why I did it, what I thought it would fix, was humiliating in ways I didn't expect. She looked down at her hands, then back up again. But that humiliation turned out to be the start of something honest. She didn't cry. She didn't over-apologize. She didn't list excuses or offer replays of old justifications. What she said next surprised both of us. I wanted to feel relevant again. That's the honest part. When I saw Ethan settle with someone who didn't need my approval to thrive, something petty in me woke up. I couldn't stand how quietly strong you were, Jennifer, and instead of respecting that, I tried to fracture it. For a long time, no one spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was necessary. Then Ethan said, gently but firmly, "You put my wife through hell, and you made me complicit without even realizing it." Lorraine nodded. I did, and that's what I regret most. She looked at me then. I don't expect forgiveness, but I would like to earn back the right to know my granddaughter, even if it's slow, even if it starts with very little. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it wasn't manipulative either. She didn't ask to hold Eliza. She didn't demand redemption. She sat there with her guilt, not trying to hand it off to anyone else. That alone told me something had shifted. I didn't answer right away. I needed more than words. I needed time. But I also knew how hard it was for people like Lorraine to sit in discomfort without controlling the outcome. I'm open to supervised visits, I said carefully, short ones, and no comments about how I parent. No stories about what I'm doing wrong, if there's judgment. The door closes again. No negotiation. She nodded, visibly swallowing her instinct to push back. Understood. She said, that weekend, she came by for 30 minutes. She sat on the far edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap, speaking gently to Eliza without overreaching. When Eliza cried, she didn't offer advice. When I soothed her, she didn't flinch. When Ethan brought out a bottle, she smiled and said, "It suits you. Small things, but meaningful." Over time, the visits became easier to manage. We didn't forget the past, but we stopped reliving it. Lorraine still had sharp edges, but she wasn't using them like weapons anymore. She asked before visiting. She respected limits. She listened more than she talked. And when she slipped up once and offered an unsolicited opinion about Eliza's sleep schedule, she caught herself mid-sentence and apologized. Old habits. She said, "I'm still learning." One night after she left, Ethan turned to me while we cleaned up Eliza's toys from the rug. "Do you think she really gets it?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment, then said, "I think she's trying to be someone new, and for the first time. It's not for appearance, it's for survival." We didn't call it reconciliation, we called it maintenance. Like tending a garden that once grew thorns. And some days, that was more than enough. I didn't expect that reclaiming peace at home would ripple outward into everything else, but it did. A few months after Eliza's first birthday, I was offered a partnership position at the interior studio I had helped build before going freelance. The offer came without me chasing it. "We've been watching how you've grown." The senior partner told me over lunch, "Not just professionally, but the way you hold your space. Clients notice that." I didn't answer right away. It wasn't that I didn't want it. I just hadn't realized how much of myself I'd shelved in order to survive chaos. Now that the noise had quieted, I could hear myself again, and what I heard was readiness. I accepted the offer under one condition. I'd maintain control over my project timelines and client selection. I wasn't willing to trade stability for prestige, not anymore. I wanted to build spaces that told the truth about the people who lived in them, not just the version they performed for dinner parties, and I wasn't afraid to say no. Ethan, in his own quiet way, was growing too. He began volunteering at a local fatherhood group, mentoring young men who had no models of emotional presence growing up. I watched him speak to a circle of 20-year-olds with the kind of tenderness he had once withheld from himself. Most of us learned how to be sons before we learned how to be men. He said one night, "But being a father is a whole different story." He never mentioned Lorraine in those sessions, but the absence said enough. Our home began to feel less like a place we managed and more like a place we belonged to. Eliza learned to walk on the same floorboards where I once stood frozen in fear of what would come next. She took her first steps toward a bookshelf filled with stories I had handpicked, stories where the girl saves herself and the ending isn't about rescue, but return. Every time she stumbled, she looked back, not for permission, but for reassurance. And every time, we were there, steady, unshaken, present. Lorraine kept her distance respectfully. She visited twice a month, never longer than an hour, always with something small for Eliza and nothing for show. Once she brought an old photo album, opened it gently, and pointed to a picture of Ethan as a toddler. He hated wearing socks. She said softly, would pull them off 5 minutes after I dressed him. I watched her face carefully. There was no performance in it, just memory, worn down like a pebble in the river. I still didn't trust her completely. I probably never would, but I didn't need to. I trusted myself around her now. That was enough. At Eliza's second birthday, we held a quiet backyard gathering, just close friends, some family, no decorations that needed approval. Grace brought homemade lemon cake and wore her emotional support friend hoodie again. Even though it was 80 degrees, Lorraine arrived with a hand-knitted cardigan for Eliza and asked where she could place it without interrupting. Tom came too. He and Lorraine kept their distance but exchanged polite nods. Grown people making grown choices. That alone felt like a milestone. After the cake, Ethan stood up to say a few words. He didn't prepare anything. He just spoke with the kind of clarity I hadn't seen in him 3 years ago. There was a time when I thought family meant loyalty at any cost. he said, looking first at me, then at Eliza. Now I know it means showing up even when it's hard, admitting when you were wrong, and doing better not for applause, but for peace. A few people clapped softly. I didn't. I just reached for his hand under the table and squeezed it once. He squeezed back. That night, as we cleaned up after everyone left, Ethan found one of Eliza's tiny shoes under the hydrangea bush. He held it up like it was treasure. "She's growing fast," he said. I nodded, and we're growing with her. Later, while folding the last blanket and locking the back door, I paused for a moment. The quiet no longer felt like an echo of what was missing. It felt earned, like something we had carved out slowly, stubbornly, through tears, truth, and a long list of boundaries that had finally held. Sometimes I think about the version of myself that stood in Lorraine's dining room 2 years ago, belly full of life, heart full of quiet dread, trying to smile through betrayal served on silver trays. I don't recognize her anymore, not because she was weak, but because she was still hoping people would change just because they were supposed to. I no longer live with that kind of hope. I live with boundaries, and they hold better than hope ever did. Eliza was nearly 3 when she asked her first question about Lorraine that I couldn't answer with distraction. "Why doesn't Grandma stay for dinner?" she asked one evening as Lorraine dropped off a birthday gift and left after 10 minutes. I looked at Ethan. He looked at me. We didn't panic. We didn't over-explain. I sat on the couch beside her and said, "Because sometimes grown-ups hurt each other, and when that happens, it takes time to learn how to be safe again." She nodded once, content with the honesty, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. That was enough. Ethan and I had grown into a rhythm that didn't revolve around conflict. We made decisions without fear of backlash. We invited people into our home based on alignment, not obligation. And we said no with grace, not guilt. That was the real victory. Not the dramatic reveal at the baby shower, not Lorraine's public unraveling, but the slow, steady rebuilding of a life that finally felt like ours. One Sunday afternoon, we walked together through the farmer's market downtown. Eliza held my hand in one and a lavender lemonade in the other. Ethan carried a tote bag filled with fresh herbs and toddler-sized carrots. We passed a vendor selling hand-carved wooden toys, and Eliza squealed when she saw a duck on wheels. I reached for my wallet, but Lorraine, who had quietly joined us near the flower stalls, stepped forward and said, "Let me—" I hesitated, then nodded. Small gestures were still gestures. We weren't healed, but we were functional. A few stalls down, Grace appeared, sunglasses on, coffee in hand, that same effortless energy she carried into every room. She greeted Eliza with a squish and looked at me like we shared a secret no one else knew. "You look light," she said softly when we stepped aside, "like you're not carrying anything that doesn't belong to you anymore." I smiled. "I finally learned how to set things down." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. That night, after Eliza fell asleep, Ethan and I sat on the porch watching the sky fade from rose to deep gray. He rested his hand on my knee, thumb brushing a familiar rhythm. "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing all of this?" he asked. "Every day," I replied. "But I think that's what makes it feel real now. We didn't get lucky. We got honest." He nodded, eyes soft but clear. "I'm proud of you," he said. "For all the times you didn't scream, for all the times you held the line. I didn't cry. I just leaned into a shoulder and let the quiet stretch. Some victories aren't loud. Some feel like breath, like rest, like finally being able to sleep through the night without rehearsing a defense in your mind. We still had challenges. There were still days I felt triggered by an old tone in Lorraine's voice, or the way Ethan hesitated before defending a decision I'd made as a mother. But now, I called it out, I named it, and it passed, like a storm that didn't rattle the foundation anymore because we'd finally poured new concrete. One evening, Ethan found an old photo tucked in the back of a drawer. It was from our engagement party, before everything cracked. Lorraine stood between us, smiling wide, one hand on Ethan's arm, the other lightly gripping my shoulder. I looked at that photo for a long time, not with bitterness, but with clarity. That wasn't a happy moment. That was the beginning of pretending, and I would never go back to that woman again. I placed the photo in a new envelope labeled, "For Eliza, one day," because I wanted her to know the truth, not just the clean version, not just the happy photos, but the cost of peace and the strength it takes to protect it. On Eliza's 4th birthday, we rented a small community space near the botanical gardens. It had large windows, wooden beams, and the kind of light that made everything feel gentle. We didn't hire a planner. We didn't have a theme, just soft colors, low tables, finger food, and people who loved our daughter without needing to perform it. Grace brought a playlist. Tom arrived early and helped string paper lanterns across the ceiling. Lorraine came quietly, holding a gift she had clearly wrapped herself, its corners uneven but her effort unmistakable. She asked if she could help with setup, and when I handed her a box of cups without speaking, she understood that was a yes. Eliza was radiant in a cotton sundress, messy curls framing her face, cake on her cheeks before the second song played. She didn't know that some of the people in the room once stood on opposite sides of a storm. She didn't have to. That wasn't her inheritance. What she would inherit, I hoped, was the quiet understanding that strength doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like saying no. Sometimes it looks like walking out of a room without explaining yourself. And sometimes it looks like staying, but on your own terms. Near the end of the party, as we packed leftover snacks and folded chairs, Lorraine approached me. She didn't pull me aside. She didn't lower her voice. She simply said, "Thank you for letting me be here today. I know it's not owed." I nodded. "It's not. But I appreciate that you see that now." She smiled, tired but sincere. I never knew how much damage I caused until I saw Ethan look at me like a stranger. That broke something in me, in a good way. I didn't respond right away. I didn't have to. The moment had already said enough. That evening, after everyone left and the house was finally still, I stood by the window watching the sky darken. Ethan came up behind me, Eliza asleep against his chest, her fingers tangled in his shirt. He rested his chin near my shoulder and whispered, "Do you realize what you did?" I turned slightly, waiting. You changed our entire story, not just mine, not just hers, all of it. I breathed in slowly, then said, "I didn't change it alone, but I did stop it from repeating." The road here hadn't been clean. It had been layered with silences, missteps, and truths that took too long to say. But what mattered most wasn't that we got it right quickly. It was that we chose not to lie to ourselves anymore. And from that truth, everything else began to shift. My marriage didn't become perfect, but it became real. My daughter wouldn't grow up with a mother who smiled through condescension or built a life around shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. She would grow up watching her parents struggle, talk, rebuild, and draw lines with clarity and kindness. She would learn that self-respect wasn't loud, but it was unshakable. Sometimes I still think about the woman who planned that first baby shower, the one who believed a party could disguise a pattern, who thought control could pass for care, who underestimated what it means when a woman stops hoping to be liked and starts demanding to be respected. I don't hate her. I don't pity her either. I just no longer bend to her version of love. And strangely, now that she knows that, she's become easier to be around. Power loses its shape when no one fears it. If you're listening to this because you've ever sat at a table where everyone smiled and no one saw you, I hope you know this. You don't owe anyone your silence just because they gave you a seat. You don't have to carry someone else's comfort if it comes at the cost of your own peace. You can leave the room, you can rewrite the story, and you can do it without screaming. I've learned that family isn't about who claims you when it's convenient. It's about who honors your truth when it's uncomfortable. Who shows up not to correct you, but to stand beside you while you heal. And who grows with you, not just because they want to be forgiven, but because they finally understand why they need to be different. Have you ever stood up to someone who tried to define your worth by how small you were willing to be? What did you learn about yourself when you stopped letting them? I'd love to hear your story, because sometimes the most powerful way to end a cycle is simply to speak. And sometimes that's how it all begins again, but better.